time for Overtime.
Stop what you're doing and listen.
In the world of sports, it's all about the playmakers in today's headlines, from locals to the pros, with interviews from local standouts and sports all-stars across the country that will have you talking.
He'll shoot, and he hits it at the buzzer!
Hear from coaches to players, sports analysts, and broadcasters who are a part of the action every day. Overtime, now with Bert Ramin on ESPN 102.3 AM 1000 KSOO, Sioux Falls sports leader.
You're in the right place at the right time. It is an early Thursday edition and a shortened Thursday edition of Overtime. We got you covered, though. It's Game 6, Timberwolves and Nuggets on the way tonight. So much to look forward to in the NBA postseason, including the Boston Celtics punching their ticket on to the Eastern Conference Finals. The Colorado Avalanche live to fight another day. Clutch goal late in the third last night to make the difference, win it by 2 down in Dallas and force a Game 6. And we got our rusty, trusty buddy over here across the table, Dustin Baker, breaking down the Minnesota Vikings schedule and the broader NFL news and schedules from across the league. A lot to get to today on this Thursday, May 16th edition of Overtime. Thanks, as always, for being along for the ride. I'm your host, Bert Ramin. Coming up in hour number 1, headlines, highlights, and more. Dustin Baker chattering about the Vikings schedule. We'll break it down, the best games on the schedule, the most watchable games, and we'll power rank the games at home for you Vikings fans that may or may not have season tickets, may or may not have individual tickets, preseason tickets. We'll hear it from the man himself on what games are the best bang for your buck, what games could surprise, and what games might be a slaughter or a snooze, and one that you might be able to stay home for this year from the Vikings at home in their slate. Ranking Vikings home game in order of intrigue, roster news, toughest stretches, and everything you need to know about the NFL schedule and the Vikings schedule, all in store for hour number 1. It's a 90-minute show today, so we'll get you your headlines, highlights, talk about Augie baseball and softball. Congratulations to Coach Melstead and the softball team off to the D2 College Softball World Series down in sunny Orlando, Florida. More on that here in just a few moments on the show. Also deliver odds tonight in the NBA and the good, the bad, the ugly to send you packing on this Thursday of Overtime. Now into your scorecard. First things first, let's talk about the Colorado Avalanche. It was do or die last night, and they most certainly did.
Now Arturi Lehkonen. He gets through S. Lundell. Lehkonen escapes. Couldn't get a shot away. Now leaves it for McKinnon. McKinnon holds. He scores! The Mac attack is back, Jack!
That wasn't the game winner. It wasn't the difference, but it was the game solidifier late for McKinnon, Nathan McKinnon, and the Avs to win it 5-3 on the road in Dallas. That series now 3-2. Audio there courtesy of KKSC. Cale Makar had a couple goals last night. He says it was do or die for his team, and we showed up.
Obviously, do or die game, so from here on out in this series. So for us, I think each of us, we all feed off each other, kind of. At the end of the day, we got to be the best we can be, and a couple of lapses in games, and I felt like we were back to kind of forcing their hand tonight and playing well.
That's Cale Makar, a couple goals last night. Jared Bednar, the head coach of the Colorado Avalanche, says that his team played their best when they needed to.
You get the lead. I don't think the comeback goal rattled us at all. It was just like we got lots of time. We can keep pushing, keep doing the right things, and just stressing the right things on the bench. But they were bought into it tonight. It was a really good group effort.
Good group effort to the tune of a 5-3 road win, forcing Game 6 back home in Denver. That series all of a sudden looks like a series again. Tonight in the NHL, Rangers at Canes. Rangers once again looking for an opportunity to close out the series in Raleigh, 6 o'clock on TNT. Oilers and Canucks from Vancouver, 9 o'clock puck drop tonight, also on TNT. That series is not winnable tonight, but it's tied 2-2 as we tune that up for a 9 o'clock start time. NBA Finals, one team's season came to a close. One team season continuing for the Boston Celtics. Jason Tatum, pretty darn fantastic. 25 points, 10 rebounds, and 9 assists as the Celtics slam the door on the Cavs.
Jalen turns the corner, attacks, kick out, Holiday touches to Horford. How fitting would this be? A straightaway three for Al Horford, his 6th of the night.
Gotta love it for Horford. Gotta love it for Boston. They're moving on. Joe Mazzulla says that his team came together at the right time. Michelle Smallman says it's time to put some respect on the Celtics name.
I just think it's kind of funny that despite being so dominant this season and getting the job done now 2 rounds in a row, that you guys are not giving them a chance really at all to win this whole thing. You're saying they'll make it to the NBA Finals, but they're not going to beat whoever comes out of the West. And I think you should be giving them more respect, and that you should be looking at this team the way that they've been playing and think that they actually have a real true shot to win it all.
It does feel that way, to Smallman's credit this morning on Sportsmanlike. It does feel that way that Boston is highly regarded in the East. Are they highly regarded overall? I don't think so. I don't think Boston would beat Denver. I don't know how I feel about Boston, Minnesota. But Boston, OKC, I would tend to lean Boston just because of the veteran experience there, but certainly not getting a ton of respect after they are the first team to punch their ticket to the conference finals. Elsewhere last night, Dallas and OKC, Luka Doncic shows up, and the team earns another big road win in the series.
Three-pointer, no, and it's tipped out top of the key. Irving to Doncic for 3. Luka Doncic, 31 points. Timeout Oklahoma City as Dallas now has its largest lead of the night at 18 points.
Triple-double for Doncic, 31 points, 10 rebounds, 11 assists. Dallas takes the Game 5 victory, leads the series 3-2. Game 6 back home in Dallas. They lost a game recently on their home floor in that series. That has been a very underrated series. 104-92 the final there in Oklahoma City. Tonight in the NBA, Nuggets and Timberwolves, Game 6, do or die for the Timberwolves, 7:30 start time on ESPN. As for the topics that emerge when any team season ends, it talks about the head coach, the players that could be on the move, and the big name last night in the wake, of course, of the loss for the Cleveland Cavaliers is what's next for Donovan Mitchell. We're going to get you a little bit more on Mitchell's destinations right now. Here's Zach Lowe talking about Donovan Mitchell, his best landing spots this offseason if he does move places.
I think people will be shocked to hear the name of Lakers on the ESPN airwaves today, but Lakers are one, and they can trade 3 picks in the offseason. People will scoff at the Lakers offer because they don't have like a blue chip prospect, but you throw Austin Reeves and 3 unprotected Lakers picks with how old LeBron is and how injury-riddled AD has been before the season, that's valuable. Miami, to me, is the other team to watch. They're always hunting around. They've been connected with Mitchell over the years. They're lurking, and they have a lot of stuff to offer in terms of picks and young players.
Picks and young players. We'll see if anyone wants Tyler Hero. Last offseason, that didn't go so well for Miami on the trade block there. Dustin Baker's across from me. He was talking to me during that audio clip about the potential for LeBron James, the potential for the Lakers to acquire Mitchell. But you had an out-of-the-box kind of thought here. What did you say to me just as that was playing in regards to LeBron James, the Lakers, and Donovan Mitchell?
Well, Spida Mitchell should stay there, and LeBron should join him back home in Cleveland. I'm kind of accepted that LeBron will just stay with the Lakers, but I think that has grown stale. Even if they find their coveted third superstar, I just don't think those super teams that are aging work anymore. The Suns are great evidence. We talked about it last week, and I just fear that if the Lakers run it back, it's going to be more of the same. Therefore, I think that LeBron should spend these final hopeful 2 years or whatever. I think he should go back home to the East and preferably the Cavs because they have a nice system right now.
And it would be pretty darn poetic. And again, sports, how do you not get romantic about baseball, basketball, football, whatever? But to start a career or to finish a career where you started, finish a career where you're from would be pretty darn cool for LeBron James. And I know you're not tied to the Lakers as much as you're tied to LeBron and your fandom. So that would be pretty cool and a fitting way to end a career if it does end there.
Yeah, and that's just, smoke right now. Like I said, I think he enjoys the Lakers. And this is just my personal frustration that I don't know that another guy will help the Lakers get to the promised land, especially with the Nuggets still in their prime.
Lakers coaching search before we dive into the NFL talk. J.J. Redick or somebody else for you?
Somebody else. Redick, I think, he's kind of like Josh McCown, 2 years ago during that when he just interviewed for the Texans job? We're like, what? Don't you have to do a little bit first? They're interviewing a lot of intriguing assistants, which I think will ultimately come to fruition. Usually LeBron is actually on the sidelines of this coach search thing, so he doesn't have much pull, or so they say. Redick, I guess, would be fun and intriguing, but he probably needs a little bit of assistant experience before he takes the plunge.
Lastly, on the scorecard here, before we dive into the NFL talk, Cubs did win in Game 3 in Atlanta, avoiding the sweep 7-1 yesterday. Colorado got a win in San Diego over the Padres 8-0. And another tough game for the Minnesota Twins. They lose. Pablo Lopez picks up loss number 3 of the year, 4-0 at home to the Yankees. Game 3 of that series. Twins looking to avoid the sweep to the Yankees. Gets going at 12:10 today, 11:30 pregame coverage right here on ESPN Sioux Falls. Now into the NFL talk. It's a fun day. It's probably overblown, and everybody makes a big deal out of everything in the NFL these days. But the schedule is out. We got the international games. We got the season openers, everything in between. Initial reactions to the Vikings schedule as it came together.
Well, I was downtrodden because this is a third-place schedule. This was the fruit of your anti-hard work, and it does not look like a third-place schedule. One game, one loss separated the Vikings from having a fourth-place schedule, so you can pick whichever one that is. Conveniently, it's probably that Raiders game that they won 3-0. And then they actually would have had an easy schedule, like the Bears do by every metric suggests that the Bears have an easy schedule. So, yeah, this is difficult, and the most murderous part, which we'll talk about, is the beginning of it. Not just like, hey, the first 3 games are tough, like the first half of it is tough. But I will give a caveat that I do every year, like I do with the draft, like, hey, all these players aren't going to be good. The schedule, when you look at it in May, is never what it seems when you get there. Some quarterbacks are going to get hurt. Coaches are going to get fired. It never looks exactly how you think when you first size it up.
And I agree with that. I looked at the Packers schedule yesterday, and I was like, man, this is the worst I've felt about a schedule in a long time. I mean, I really mean that. There's certain bright spots, but the number of winnable games, or the number of games that I used to look at when we had Rodgers and we had Devontae Adams and all those great players, I would be win. Oh, maybe we'll lose that one. Win. It would be 13-3 back in the day when it was 16 games. And it's pretty hard for the Packers in terms of saying definitively, we're going to win this game. We're going to go on a run. And that's how I feel about the Vikings schedule, too. I did my little win-loss projection here. I'll keep that covered up. But again, it's a mixed bag for Minnesota and very challenging off the start. Early bye as well. They've got a bye in week 6. We'll go through this game by game. But preseason talk here, Raiders are the only home game that's to be determined as of my printing moments ago for the date. At Cleveland, at Philly in the preseason. Do you go out to the preseason games, or are those generally tickets that you hook up to somebody else?
I give those away for free because now that I'm a veteran of going to these games, we've had season tickets since the place opened in 2016. We go to the momentous ones, like the first one. We went to the first one of the O'Connell era. I think we went to the first one when Kirk was signed. So if it's one of those off seasons, it's like, oh, I just can't wait for it to start, then we'll find an excuse to go up there. But otherwise, I just give them away. You talked about writing down wins and losses. I talked to Bryant McKinney, who played for the Vikings for a decade last night, and players do that too. They look at the schedule and they start saying, yep, we'll win that one. I don't know about that one. And he brings that up every year, and every year I forget about it. And I think that's so cool how players will even look ahead and say, oh, yeah, the Lions, we're going to take them. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely interesting stuff. And that starting slate for Minnesota regular season at the New York Giants, a team that has kind of had their number recently, but certainly they're down from years past. Home to San Francisco, home to Houston, at Green Bay, and then overseas in London against the New York Jets and presumably Aaron Rodgers. And then a week 6 bye out of that, home to Detroit, at the Rams, home to the Colts. That's the first half of the schedule for the Minnesota Vikings. We'll take it game by game here later on in hour number 1. Before we go to an early break, though, I want to take an early break so we can get back to the meat of this schedule. Vikings Twitter is always a fun place, and I mean that fun very lightly, but the one clip to me this past week that I think had Vikings Twitter in a tizzy was Josh McCown catching a pass from J.J. McCarthy that was off target and should have just been a layup throw, and people are like, great, my life stinks, this guy's awful, blah, blah, blah. What did you make of the video and the reaction on Vikings Twitter? I got to know.
Well, very, very little. I'm used to freak-out sessions. I thought there was a part of me that said, now that Kirk's gone, we won't do this. But that part of me was very wrong. Yeah, he had a bad throw, and God forbid that happened. Overall, the aesthetic of McCarthy in purple and in front of the camera really clicked. I think he's got that part down. He's lovable. He's energetic. And I think that's why he was selected by the lovable, energetic head coach, Kevin O'Connell. But no, in terms of one errant pass, if he starts doing that, in week 8, in the fourth quarter, then I'll be right there with Vikings Twitter. But for now, nope, not going to buy into any panic.
I know I said lastly a moment ago, but lastly for this segment, any schedule release for an individual team particularly catch your eye yesterday? I know that it's always a one-upmanship on Twitter for the Chargers or the Titans or the Packers, whoever it is. Packers are never really into it, but this year I thought they did a pretty good job. Vikings do anything cool, and was there a best schedule release that you saw?
Well, the Chargers dominate this. Are you talking about the social media teams?
Yes.
Yes, okay, the Chargers dominate this every year, and each year they have to top themselves, and they do it. So this year they did the Sims, and they took backhanded shots at Harrison Butker, Rodgers kind of out there vibes. And then I think the Saints had the most pathetic one where they just said, hey, here's who we're playing. And they just tweeted the logos in a thread. It's like, man, that's some advanced thought right there. And for what it's worth, the Vikings wasn't too special either. It was just TJ Hawkinson being Steve Jobs and going like in dark mode on the iPhone or whatever. But the Chargers, you can mark that down. Whoever runs that or whichever man and woman do it, they absolutely have the hack down on how to release a schedule.
It's crazy these things all of a sudden matter so much to every NFL fan. But again, social media teams, generally, when they hit it out of the park, you get some serious clout. And that's what we saw the Titans do last year. They did basically the same thing. A little bit of a womp-womp to me. They had people on the street trying to identify logos. And it was really funny last year. This year, moderately funny. But sequels generally don't live up to it. By the way, Happy Gilmore 2 in production. Can't wait for that. Shooter's back, baby.
Overtime is in the middle of your workday. Unwrap your sandwich and get caught up with Bert Rameen on ESPN 102.3 and AM 1000 KSOO, Sioux Falls sports leader.
We're off and running on an early edition on your Thursday. It's overtime. Bert Rameen here with you, joined alongside by Dustin Baker of Vikes Now, VikingsTerritory.com. You can find him on Twitter at any time at Vikes Now, at Viking Territory, or his personal account at Dust Baker. And now let's talk the latest in the Minnesota Vikings. Not a whole lot went on this past week. We saw the reaction to the video of J.J. McCarthy's relatively off-target pass to Josh McCown. Whatever. Overreaction, off-season. And again, nobody's wearing pads. They're just wearing helmets and jerseys, whatever. But the Minnesota Vikings did make a couple roster moves this week. They let go of one of the cornerbacks on the roster. That room has a ton of competition. Juwan Williams officially released, if I'm correct there. And then also they added somebody back to the roster. Tell us about those two moves.
Yeah, Juwan Williams was a player they signed last April, and he stuck around on the practice squad but was stolen by the Bears. And he actually went and played like 4 games for the Bears. They cut him. He came back to the Vikings, and he ended up seeing action in a handful of Vikings game. He was kind of on the bottom of the cornerback depth chart. That is pretty deep right now, even though it doesn't have a total stud. But he's gone. I don't know if he'll be coming back. James Lynch was the one that came right after the Juwan Williams release. And James Lynch is intriguing for a couple reasons. He was organically drafted by the Vikings. I believe it was the 2020 draft, and they spent a 4th rounder on him. And every team has one of these guys who looks good when he plays, but then he gets hurt, and you're like, oh, well, that's that. We won't see him for a while. Last summer, Lynch got hurt while I was at training camp with my son, and he was out for the year. And it was a contract year for him, so we kind of thought, well, that might be the end of his career. Well, no, he's back. And normally I would say, well, let's see if he'll make the 53-man roster. But the Vikings' defensive tackle portion of their roster is so skimpy right now next to Harrison Phillips. It's Jerry Tillery, Jonah Williams, Jaquelin Roy, and Jonathan Bullard, that if healthy, Lynch could actually get some significant playing time. But we've been saying about him since about 2021. So it's intriguing because he has a pathway to make the team and make a dent in Brian Flores' defense. So we'll keep an eye on that one.
And obviously, there's a couple holes on the Minnesota Vikings roster. Defensive tackle, one of them. Wide receiver, 3 is another. Put up a poll earlier this week. Here are the options. Let me know what you would have voted, and then I'll tell you, of course, the results. All right, Vikings fans, what do you want to see your team do at wide receiver 3 ahead of the season? Sign someone or roll with the guys already in-house. The options are sign Hunter Renfrow, sign Michael Thomas, sign Russell Gage, or Sherfield, Powell, Naylor as the wide receiver 3, the guys on the roster right now. How would you have voted in this, and what's your guess for what the Vikings faithful voted?
I believe that they will just go with what they have, and then perhaps when the NFL has league-wide roster cuts in late August, then they'll pounce, because quietly there's usually about a dozen guys that you're like, ooh, he's available, huh? I think that might be the plan, because otherwise the Vikings have bypassed about a dozen wide receiver 3 types, and that leads me to believe that they don't really care. On that list, I would go with Hunter Renfrow, because I envision his 2021 production when he had 1,000-something yards. But it really dipped in the last 2 years. He became a footnote when Carr left and when Devontae got there. Renfrow would be my choice because he's pretty steady, and he's what you'd look for in a WR3. I'm going to guess he probably was a selection by Vikings fans in the poll.
And again, that's the most exciting thing. That is correct as far as it goes. Hunter Renfrow, 49% of the vote. Sherfield Powell Naylor was 37. Michael Thomas, 11. And Russell Gage, who I would rather have than Michael Thomas. I really would. Russell Gage over Michael Thomas. He only got one vote. It looks like 3% of the poll. By the way, back to Hunter Renfrow real quick. I like the kid. He's had moments in his career. He's had one really good year. 103 catches, 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns back in 2021. That year he was a Pro Bowler. But in 2022, it was weird. They got Derek Carr. You thought it would be, they had Derek Carr. They thought it would be just awesome with Devontae Adams coming into town. He had 330 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is an average per game of 33 yards per game. Last year, everybody said he has to be back in the offense. This is so weird. Why is he not involved? He had 15 yards per game last year with the Raiders. So is there something wrong with Renfrow? Was it a bad spot? Was it the McDaniels hire? Whatever it might be, he's going to be a super cheap veteran option for somebody, a kick of the tires. And I don't know if he's got a career path left to being on the field regularly because these last 2 years have been beyond bad for Renfrow. 330 yards in 2022, 255 yards, no scores last year. He had 25 catches in 17 games. Really poor.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I guess it doesn't make sense that he had that really wonderful year because you should at least replicate that to the tune of 500 or 600 if you have a new offense or new quarterback. But I do like because let's face it, WR3, the only thing you really need to do is catch the ball on third downs, move the sticks, and then when the season's over, you look down, you have about 650 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns. That's not a huge hurdle to clear for a wide receiver that's any good. So I think he would fit, but I'll continue to state that because they haven't made any moves in 2-3 months at that spot, I believe they enjoy what's on their depth chart. There's a lot of wide receivers, too, on the Vikings depth chart.
We talked about the Dallas Cowboys earlier this week and about their huge need, not an apparent need, a huge glaring need at running back. And I feel the same way about the Vikings at running back as I do about the Vikings at defensive tackle and wide receiver 3. And what I mean by that is post-training camp, roster cut downs, there's going to be some good, high-quality players with big contracts, small contracts, guys trying to make it in the league, guys that haven't been in the league yet, whatever it might be. There's going to be a lot of cap casualties and guys that are worth the kick of the tires, the veterans, the expensive guys that you can get on the cheap now, and then also the youngsters that you may have had circled on your roster and your want list post-draft, pre-draft that you didn't land from a Vikings or Cowboys perspective. I think the Cowboys get multiple running backs roster cut down time, and I think the Minnesota Vikings will add at either defensive tackle or wide receiver 3 around that time as well, just to give themselves a good chance and some more competition in the room. It might be Powell, Naylor, or Sherfield if they earn it, but I could certainly see the Vikings adding somebody at that stage. Is that crazy?
No, not at all. The WR3 thing has caused me heartburn because it felt like when KJ Osborne established himself in 2021, we finally got with the times. During the Zimmer era, they didn't care about WR3. It was Chad Beebe, BC Johnson, and we just rolled our eyes. Well, when Kevin O'Connell came, it was like, all right, they get it. But now we're back to, are they not going to solve this one? So, yeah, I've thought for multiple months that it's really easy to sign a WR3. Why haven't they done it yet? But I'll trust them. They know what they're doing on offense. And, hey, maybe Jalen Naylor, maybe this is the year that he actually looks good. And then on defensive tackle, if they don't do anything, later this summer, or they don't sign Calais Campbell, I think I'll be convinced that the way that Brian Flores looks at the world is, we have so many other things flying around this defense that we don't really care about defensive tackle. It's the only thing that would explain back-to-back seasons of rolling into a campaign with Jonathan Bullard or Dean Lowry, just kind of a placeholder guy.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting stuff at that defensive tackle spot since the departure of Tomlinson a couple off seasons ago. Let's talk about the broad strokes of the schedule. We're going to go in game by game and make our picks here in a next segment, but I wanted to talk about the stretches of the schedule, and you and I think are on the same page here at the early portion. It's at New York Giants, home to San Francisco, home to Houston, at Green Bay, and then the Jets in London, early game Sunday, short week with the travel, then the bye week. And the first thing that I wrote down here, I made a little bracket and I said, very tough start, and then I made a little arrow post-bye and I said, J.J. McCarthy time, right out of the bye week. If he isn't the starter week 1, and Darnold's the guy. Darnold did start 3-0, by the way, when he got to the Carolina Panthers, but they had a terrible season the rest of the way. I don't think the Vikings start 3-0, but let's say they start 1-4, 2-3 into the bye week. That is the perfect time for J.J. McCarthy if he's not the starter out of training camp in the preseason and in the regular season, if he's not the guy right out of the bye week, extra time to prep on the heels of that international trip, learning, picking the brain of Darnold, picking the brain of Kevin O'Connell, and he'll get ready to go against the Lions at home out of the bye. Am I off on that, or does that seem logical to you if he's not the starter as a place for him to make his debut if the season starts rough?
You're not wrong at all, and I'll continue to do this every week. My small statement. If it were up to me, I would start McCarthy right away, assuming he doesn't look like a train wreck this summer. But I don't think he will start. I think they'll roll with Darnold. That's why they paid him $10 million. And he, honest to goodness, he probably deserves a shot with a good offense and offensive coordinator and head coach that care about him. So, yes. Now, poor Darnold, though, these first, 6 games? Come on. This is really tough. If Kirk Cousins was a quarterback, I'd look at this schedule in the beginning and be like, oh, man, let's pray they're 500 by the midpoint of the season. And usually you shouldn't say that about a good football team praying they're 500. So this schedule is rough for anybody, but especially rough for a quarterback who's banking on a reclamation in his, fourth act, in his 6th season. So, yes, I agree with you that if they are 1-4 after the London game, then McCarthy, in theory, would have quite a lot of time to prepare, and then you let it rip from week 7 to week 18. And the good news is, once they get over the hump of Thursday Night Football, week 8 at the Rams, that's when the schedule opens up. And if they can somehow be flirting with 500 with Darnold or McCarthy, or it's just time to see McCarthy mature and develop on the fly, I keep coming back as my solace that the first half of the schedule is so murderous, but the second half really isn't that bad, and that gives me hope that would be a perfect time for McCarthy to start to earn his wings.
One other standout thing for me in the front portion of the schedule, you got your first 9 games. Hear me out on this. Of these games, Giants are a no for me, but the rest of those teams, the 8 teams in a row, Niners, Texans, Packers, Jets, Lions, Rams, Colts, Jags, all of those teams could be playoff teams this year.
Oh, yeah.
That's 8 games in a row against potential playoff competition. Worst team of that lineup is probably the Indianapolis Colts or the Jaguars, depending upon what you think they'll be this year. But that is a really tough schedule. What is kind of a takeaway from the back half of the schedule? You said you like it because it's easier, but is there anything else that you wrote down that stands out about those final 8-9 games of the season?
Absolutely. I looked at this, a lot of it. So this is the first time since 2017 that the Vikings will have back-to-back-to-back road games. It's really weird.
Yeah, they're one of, I think, 3 or 4 teams in the NFL with that at any stage this year.
Yeah, that's really weird. And that's the Jaguars, Titans, and Bears, so it could be worse for the opponent itinerary. But the last time the Vikings did this, it was 2017. They had a really good football team. They went 2-1. Thankfully, it's followed up by 3 home games, so there's kind of it's offset. I'm really sick of the Vikings and Bears on Monday Night Football, and I think Bears fans say the same. The game is never very suspenseful. It's usually sloppy because it's at Soldier Field. This one will be in Minneapolis. This would be a prime candidate to be flexed if both teams are going nowhere. So you can put me down as somebody that does not want to see Vikings and Bears on Monday Night Football. You can do it every 3 years or something, but not every year. The other thing that stands out is, let's say, because we know in our heart of hearts that the Vikings coaching staff, they're not considering this a year where, we're just going to roll over and then we'll get to 2025. No, they're going to be in it to win it. The Giants game is so perplexing because you look at it and that looks like the easy game because of what's coming up after them. But it's just like the Buccaneers last year. We looked at that. We're they better win that. Going to the Giants and playing a team that has a coach on the hot seat isn't going to be easy. And I don't care if you think Daniel Jones utterly sucks. This game isn't going to be easy. So for some Vikings fans already, they're looking ahead to the 49ers, Texans, Packers, Jets, and Lions thinking, oh my, that Giants game isn't going to be easy because they're going to be hungry. And we've already seen what Daniel Jones can do to the Vikings. He got his contract because he played 2 games against the Vikings in a 3-week span in 2022. So I will caution anybody that thinks, well, they should beat the Giants. I'm not going to be circling that as a win.
Lastly, my observation from an outside looking in perspective for the last half of the year, I wrote down the 3 straight on the road. We talked about that. That's a challenge. Doesn't matter who you play in the NFL, at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, at Chicago. They follow it up the back half following that 3-game road stint with 3 at home, Cardinals, Falcons, Bears, at Seattle, home to Green Bay. By the way, if I have to run to work and the Packers lose that one, that is going to be a December 30th run to work could be very brisk for your boy Bert. And the regular season finale at the Detroit Lions. We'll make our picks coming up next, but my last observation on that back half is kind of what you alluded to. That's time and prime for a nice finish to the season. I don't care if Minnesota's 3-6, 3-8. They could finish with 7, 8, 9 wins with that schedule, because for a young team, young quarterback, at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, at Chicago, Cardinals, Falcons, Bears, all at home. Those could be 3 wins in a row. At Seattle, home to Green Bay. The Packers-Vikings rivalry, pretty darn consistent, splits the last 2 years. And at Detroit, to round out the season, that's tough, obviously, but who knows? Maybe Detroit's resting their starters. Vikings could win 3, 4, 5 of their final 5, 6, 7 games and really inspire some confidence down the stretch, I think.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. This year, at least for a spring or summer estimation, is a lot like the 2014 season when they had Matt Castle and just drafted Teddy Bridgewater. And they ended up finishing 7-9 that year, but myself and all Vikings fans were like, sweet. This is a really good 7-9 because Bridgewater got playing time almost immediately. At least then he looked the part. So I consider this is the first season in a decade where I have predicted the Vikings to be under 500. And I have them right now at about 7-10, and I'll be perfectly content with that so long as McCarthy sees playing time in the second half of the season.
And looks good or functional, I would assume so as well, because you don't want him to come out and see playing time and look absolutely dreadful, because then we'd have a Bryce Young situation on our hands, and I don't think that would be an inspiring next offseason for Minnesota. We're going to take the break. When we come back, the best games at home this year for Minnesota. If Dustin could go to just one, if his wife keeps him home for the entire season except for one Sunday, one Monday, pick one out. What's the must-go-to game? And if you have to miss just one, which one are you hitting the snooze button on this season? Everything you need to know about this Viking schedule. Preseason games, by the way. Home to the Raiders, at Cleveland, at Philly to start out the season. And the Vikings begin the regular season on the road at the New York Giants. We continue to break down the schedule, and we'll talk some broader NFL news as well to round out hour number 1. That's coming up next. It's a Thursday. It's overtime right here on ESPN Sioux Falls.
You want more of Overtime? Podcast, free with the app or online at ESPN Sioux Falls. Overtime with Bert Rameen on ESPN 102.3 and AM 1000 KSOO.
Right back with you. It's the final segment of an early hour number 1. We're also off the air early, making way for the Minnesota Twins pregame coverage. Game 3, looking to avoid the old sweeperoo from the New York Yankees. That's a familiar theme in recent Twins history. The Yankees have their number, 11:30 pregame start time, and the game start 12:10 this afternoon right here on ESPN Sioux Falls. Minnesota Vikings schedule breakdown. We're going to touch on it one last time here and then dive into some NFL news, including a cool opportunity ahead for the New York Giants. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Vikings schedule, we talked about the broad strokes, the very tough start, the J.J. McCarthy insertion time. If he isn't the starter, 3 straight on the road. That's pretty darn unique to Minnesota, and room for a run down the stretch. If you could go to just one home game regular season, here's the home games. Niners, Texans, not the Jets. That's a home game, but it's in London. You can put that one if you'd like. Niners, Texans, Jets in London. Lions at home, Colts at home, Cardinals, Falcons, Bears, Packers. Which one are you choosing as a must-see this year?
I have a clear-cut selection here, but I will say for any of these 9, if J.J. McCarthy is the quarterback, it changes everything for my viewing experience. So I assume Sam Darnold's going to play against the 49ers and Texans, so that kind of makes it blah for me. I'm not a big Sam Darnold guy. I will cheer for him, and I'll get behind him wholeheartedly. But for me, assuming McCarthy plays, or even if he doesn't, the Falcons game, because of the Kirk Cousins grudge match, I thought there was a good possibility this would be in prime time, and even some of the rumor mill hinted as such. But it won't be unless it's flexed into that. It's December 8th, Falcons at Vikings. The last memory we have of Kirk Cousins is him blowing the Gallahorn against the Packers, I believe, on New Year's Eve.
How'd that go for you?
That was the very last thing Kirk ever did. And now he will come back as a visitor, assuming it's not Michael Penix, in December. So to see that grudge match, hoping it's McCarthy versus Cousins, past versus present, that would be the first one for sure. But then if I could have free international travel to London just as part of this hack, then I would do that too.
It'll be a pretty cool matchup. Jets and Vikings, London. That is Sunday, October the 6th. Niners, Texans, two really great home games right out the stretch. And if you want to see top-tier teams, top-tier quarterbacks in the Twin Cities, and possibly losses for Minnesota, we'll wait and see how it all shakes out. But most missable game, these ones down the stretch, the Colts, Cardinals, Bears at home. Which one are you most likely to miss if you're going to miss one this year?
Well, the only reason I would miss any of these is if it was weather. I've only been snowed in once in going to these games now for 8 years, and that was 2022 against the Giants, where Greg Joseph kicked a 62-yard field goal to win the thing. But if I get snowed in against the Bears on Monday Night Football, I will not care. I'm very sick of playing the Bears, like I said, in prime time. And sometimes, even though these rivalries are storied and you gear up for them the week of, I'm like, anytime the Vikings and Bears play, it's ugly, and it's not reflective of how good they actually are. I do have hope, conversely, that we could get a Caleb Williams versus J.J. McCarthy era, where these guys are both actually pretty good, and then it would become must-see TV. But as you can tell from my tone, I'm generally low about the Bears, especially on primetime. And then with the Cardinals, I'm pretty sure the Vikings have already played them 2 or 3 times at U.S. Bank Stadium. So I've seen enough of them. Thankfully, that probably won't be a really daunting game, but that would be near the bottom of my list for excitement.
Lastly, as far as the divisional opponents go, the Packers have some separation. Vikings will face them Week 4 and Week 17. The Lions on the schedule Week 7 and Week 18. But back to that Bears point, you see the Bears 2 times in less than a month and 2 times in, I don't even know how many days that is. Looks like 20 days. So I think we're going to have a little bit of that midseason chatter. Hey, young quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, Caleb Williams. We're going to have a pretty definitive start or a split between those two in their careers with their respective teams.
Yeah, we already know, they're not mysterious about it all, that Caleb Williams is going to start. And I do like your theory about handing McCarthy the baton probably after the bye week. So, yeah, I think that pitting them against each other in 22-day span, assuming that they're both playing, will be fun, and that can really reshape the rivalry. The Bears are probably the worst in the business about cultivating a quarterback. The Vikings aren't that far behind. They haven't truly cultivated one for longer than 5 or 6 seasons since Fran Tarkenton, with a small caveat of Dante Culpepper. So you would think out of these two teams that one of them will get their guy. They've already got him, and then stick with him for longer than 5 years. It's weird that both the Kirk Cousins and Dante Culpepper experiences both severed at 5.5 seasons, almost to like the week on the calendar.
Interesting stuff as well. And again, the Vikings last on the schedule. I think you posted this yesterday. It's either you or some other Vikings prominent person in my life. No holidays this year for Minnesota. How's it feel to have the holidays?
Well,
back?
It's great because I usually have to sell it to my wife. Like, hey, it's not all bad that Thanksgiving night is the Vikings game. We can go somewhere right before the game. Yeah, this is the first time since 2019 that the Vikings have no games on holidays, whether you're talking Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. It's totally agnostic from holidays this year, and it's good for a family man.
Yeah, and you avoided Christmas Day, which is also new for the NFL on Netflix this year. The NFL's long-lasting Hard Knocks documentary is expanding once again. We saw the in-season, the recent expansion. They always do the preseason training camp, and now they're going to do an off-season with the New York Giants. It'll air on HBO this summer, hopefully before the training camp. 5-part series will begin July 2nd, so it will be before training camp and air every Tuesday in July. Cameras have been filming Giants GM Joe Schoen and others in the team's front office and will chronicle free agency, the draft, and the rest of the offseason. I feel like I spoke this into fruition. I said, hey, if they ever do a War Room documentary, even if it's 10 years old, because they don't want to give out sensitive information, I'm all in. I love the chatter. I love the intrigue. I love the moves. I love the phone calls, the negotiation. I think we're in on this with the Giants coming up in season or in off season. Hard Knocks starting on July the 2nd. How excited are you for this potentially?
That could be cool because you like to see the ins and outs, basically what you've preached of how the decision making is done. I also saw that they're doing a Cowboys one. I think that's more comprehensive from the last however many years. Go figure that the Cowboys would be spotlighted in something nationally.
Yep.
But yeah, I would. The Vikings have never been on Hard Knocks. It would be cool to see them on it. But yeah, I would get excited to see, especially for the Giants, because they have to have a real home run off season and then season, because that playoff win they had over the Vikings, that bought Brian Dable no favor. So it's a very pivotal season for the Giants.
Definitely true. Pivotal for Dable, and then, of course, for Daniel Jones, because his contract, and people like me had said, what the heck are they doing thinking about drafting a quarterback? They got Daniel Jones. They just paid him. But the way that contract is structured is that after this year, if he's what he was or not anything great, they're done with Daniel Jones. They will clap their hands, move on from Jones, and draft somebody or get somebody new there in the Big Apple. Jared Goff got a huge deal since we last talked. Let's talk about that. I think that neither of us had him in our top 10 last week. We did the quarterback rankings, but he's such a great fit for Detroit. I'm not scared of Jared Goff when the Packers go against him, but he's been pretty darn good in Detroit as the starting QB, and he's now up there with the best of them in terms of being paid high. We have this conversation, this debate all the time about highest paid receiver, highest paid defensive back, highest paid quarterback. It's cyclical, and the best guys always get their turn to be there, but then we also get these guys like Jared Goff or Kirk Cousins. No disrespect, he's not a top quarterback, but at times he's been up there as well. What did you make of the Jared Goff deal and the long-term future there in Detroit?
I could not believe it, because every time you think you have the NFL figured out, something like this happens where, boom, the guy, Jared Goff, gets $53 million per season. It's kind of like last year when Odell Beckham got $15 million for 1 year. I was like, wow. I don't have a grievance with Goff getting that much money. I was just shocked that it happened, because if he was going to get upper-tier cash, I would have had it pegged in, $47 million or something slightly above like Kirk Cousins. But no, he went to the other end of the spectrum and is now the second highest paid per average annual value. And sometimes I just wonder how that happens. They have Hendon Hooker, who they drafted in the second round. Well, he's a footnote. And it's just that Goff, he's good, but I don't know that you could drop him onto the Panthers team right now. And would they get to the playoffs? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think that Goff is in my top 15, and I want to say he's probably in my top 13, 14. The guys that are outside of the top 10 that I put together last week that are ahead of Goff are Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. I know he was in yours. And Kyler Murray and Goff. Murray physically and entertainment-wise, way better than Goff, but Goff's a better winner than Murray is at this stage and has been so good for the city of Detroit. That's where I have Jared Goff pigeonholed. So that's interesting there within the past week. Lastly here, a couple more articles. Odell Beckham Jr. to the Dolphins. We talked about that initially, but he is, quote-unquote, at peace with being a journeyman and a third receiver, or not at peace of being a journeyman, but at peace with being a secondary player with the Dolphins. Do you think that works out to the tune of Miami taking the next step on offense?
No, not necessarily being a huge advantage, but I will tell you this guy knows how to pick them. He picked the Rams in 2021. They won a Super Bowl. The Ravens were one of the NFL's best teams before they weren't last year. So he knows how to identify talent on a team. So I would expect the Dolphins to be right there in the mix. I don't know if they have the juice or the offensive line to go win the Super Bowl. But yeah, his career has taken a very interesting arc. Mostly derailed by injury. I think he will only enhance the Dolphins' offense, but I don't think it's some big like cake topper that puts them over the top.
Talked about a critical season for Daniel Jones a moment ago. Critical season for Tua, Dak Prescott, contract-wise, and those two are the next up to the plate that could be some of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. The other guy that comes to mind, and no, I don't think he's a top 3, top 5 guy, but Jordan Love is going to get paid very soon, either this year, next year, or sometime in between. He'll be up there as well in terms of the highest paid guys. Definitely, I think Jordan Love is going to put together some sort of season, mid-season, and say, hey, they paid Jared Goff that much money, now pay me. It's my turn, and I think Jordan Love will get quite a bit of money, maybe around that top 2, top 3 guarantees. We'll wait and see. I think the Packers are wise to get that done sooner than later. So now the Packers have that because with the Goff deal in division, it's kind of in your face. I think the Packers would be very wise to get Jordan Love's deal done very soon. Thoughts on those other two quarterbacks, Tua and Dak? Who do you think earns the better contract in the next offseason or between now and then, between Tua, Dak, and Love?
Probably, well, certainly Love will get the bigger one. He looked so good down the stretch last year, especially in that playoff game. And then, I mean, Goff's deal guarantees that Dak is going to get that same deal or more. Certainly Love, because he's also has youth on his side. Tua Tagovailoa is so interesting. Every time I watch him, it's usually in a game where you need something from him, and he desperately needs a signature moment, probably in the postseason, which I don't think we've seen from him. Still, he'll get a sweet contract, even if he doesn't have that this season. The bigger contract will probably go to Prescott because he's more established. He actually has some signature moments. Tua, to my knowledge, doesn't have any. So I will say that Dak gets the bigger contract, and I think because of this Goff deal, the other thing about Goff's deal is the guaranteed money.
Yeah,
like it's 3 or 4 years that he's going to be the guy, and so I'm kind of like, it sounds like you are. I'm like, well, good. They're not going to go and like get the rookie quarterback and then totally have the league on notice. But I will say that Prescott's deal is bigger than Tua. This is a ginormous season for Tua to figure out if he wants to be in that top 10 conversation. I just don't know if he's got that oomph.
There could be a lot of quarterbacks on the move following this season. Lastly, on the schedule from a broad strokes perspective, Netflix will stream a pair of games on Christmas Day. You got the Chiefs at the Steelers, not crazy pizzazzy there, but Ravens at Texans, playoff rematch. That game was tied at the halftime break in the postseason, wild card round. 2 games on Christmas Day. How do you feel about this schedule expansion onto Thursdays, Fridays, some Saturday games late in the season, Sunday games, Monday games, and now we got Wednesday, Christmas Day? I'm never going to complain about football, but this does feel like we're kind of trending towards 18 regular season games all over the place, and I hope 2 bye weeks for each team.
Yeah, Goodell even said that. I think Goodell despises preseason because they don't make much money. The ticket prices are like $5 usually. So I think he endorsed around draft time the 18-game season with 2 bye weeks, and you have that Super Bowl holiday that we talked about with President's Day. I think that's probably coming. And then on the footballization of the week, I'm all for it. I don't really like when the Vikings play on a holiday. I won't care when my kids are grown. But right now, when they're, we only got these precious years left, but still in the house, you kind of want to have traditional holidays rather than dragging them to Vikings game. But in terms of, hey, if you want to toss on the Ravens and Texans on Christmas, I'm all for it. The last thing, in case I forget at the very end, I'm not sure if it's all black or all white, but the Vikings are on deck, per some of the sources I chat with, to have those alternate uniforms we've asked about forever. Kind of like the Bengals, their famous, whatever they call them, whiteouts or icy whites or something like that. The Vikings will either have some rendition of the white helmet or it'll be a blackout on primetime. When I figure out which one, I'll let the listeners know.
I think white would be pretty cool, but I got to tell you, if I were a Viking fan, I would love to see what the black design would be, kind of that armor look. That would be pretty darn cool. Do you have a preference, white or black, on that announcement, do you think?
100% white for me. I love the way the Bengals have done it, and then there's been pretty renowned photo shoppers on Twitter that have done the Vikings all white. And we already know what the white uniforms look like, but with that sweet white helmet and a purple horn, it looked glorious.
I think so, too. And again, hopefully glorious in a loss, but we'll wait and see. Minnesota Vikings chatter.
Throw that in there.
The entirety of hour number 1. Got to. Absolutely got to. That's Dustin Baker at Vikes Now at VikingsTerritory.com as well. Always appreciate the time, my friend. We'll do it again in a week.
Yeah, go Timberwolves.
Hey, let's look forward to that. It's Game 6 tonight, and that game, a really tough one, and it is a start time of 7:30 on ESPN. Back in a moment, headlines, highlights, odds for tonight's game in the NBA, and the good, the bad, the ugly on tap next on Overtime.